February 14th, 1967. Valentine's Day. Denny's Restaurant, Barstow, California. 6:23 a.m. A 22-year-old waitress named Linda Morrison was working the morning shift. She'd been on her feet since 4 a.m. serving truckers and travelers on their way to Las Vegas. She was exhausted. Her feet hurt, her back ached, and she'd just found out her husband had been laid off from the factory. They had 2 kids under 3. Rent was due in a week. She was one crisis away from complete collapse. Then Dean Martin walked in. Not Dean Martin, the superstar, just a man in a rumpled suit who'd been driving all night from Los Angeles to Vegas. He sat at the counter, ordered coffee and eggs, smiled at Linda. She recognized him immediately but tried to play it cool. Didn't want to make a fuss, didn't want to be that person who bothers celebrities. She poured his coffee with shaking hands, and that's when it happened. Her exhaustion, her stress, her fear about money, it all caught up with her in one moment. The pot slipped. Hot coffee splashed all over Dean Martin's lap, all over his expensive suit. Linda's heart stopped. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Please don't. I'll get towels. I'll pay for the cleaning. Please don't tell my manager. I need this job. I can't lose this job." Dean Martin looked down at his ruined suit. Then he looked up at Linda, and he smiled. The real smile, not the performance smile. "Miss, it's just coffee, and this suit needed cleaning anyway." What happened next would change Linda Morrison's life forever. And she'd spend the next 50 years trying to understand why a famous man showed her more kindness in 5 minutes than she'd received in her entire life. You think you know Dean Martin's kindness stories? The tips he gave, the checks he wrote, the careers he helped. You've heard the sanitized versions, the legends that make him sound like a saint. This story is different, because this story isn't about money. It's about dignity, about seeing someone when they feel invisible, about the small acts of humanity that cost nothing but mean everything. This is Linda Morrison's story, told in her own words in a 2017 interview when she was 72 years old. This is about what Dean Martin did in that Denny's on Valentine's Day, 1967, and why it mattered more than any performance he ever gave. This is about the moment a broke waitress learned that kindness doesn't require wealth. It just requires attention. And Dean Martin was paying attention. Let's go back to that morning. Linda had managed to grab towels and was frantically trying to blot the coffee from Dean's lap. Her hands were shaking. Tears were streaming down her face. The manager had appeared, looking furious. "Mr. Martin, I'm so sorry. This is unacceptable." "Linda, Dean held up his hand. "Stop. Your waitress didn't do anything wrong. Accidents happen. I'm fine." The manager wasn't backing down. "Sir, we'll comp your meal. We'll pay for dry cleaning." Dean's voice became firm. "What you'll do is leave this young lady alone. She's had a rough morning. Haven't you, miss?" Linda nodded, unable to speak. Dean turned to the manager. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to go back to whatever you were doing. I'm going to finish my breakfast, and this waitress is going to serve me. Without fear, without worry. Do we understand each other?" The manager hesitated, then nodded and walked away. Linda stood there, towel in hand, completely bewildered. Dean gestured to the stool next to him. "Sit down for a minute. I can't. I'm working." I said, "Sit down. There's nobody else in here. You need a break." Linda sat. She was crying openly now, not from embarrassment, from exhaustion, from fear, from the overwhelming weight of trying to survive. Dean didn't say anything for a moment. Just sipped his coffee, what was left of it, and ate his eggs. Then, quietly, he asked, "What's your name?" "Linda. Linda Morrison." "Linda, do you have kids?" She nodded. "2 boys, 3 years old and 18 months. That's hard work." She laughed bitterly. "Yeah, it is." "And your husband?" "He got laid off last month. We're not doing great." Dean nodded slowly. "I grew up in a town where everyone was not doing great. Steubenville, Ohio. Steel mills and poverty. My mother worked herself to death so we could eat. I watched her scrub clothes until her hands bled. I watched my father work 16-hour days cutting hair for pennies. So I know what not doing great looks like." Linda looked at him. "Then why are you being nice to me? Most people in your position would be furious. I ruined your suit." Dean smiled. "Linda, I'm not in a position above you. I'm just a guy who got lucky. I could sing okay. I met the right people. I worked hard. But mostly, I got lucky. You're working hard too. You're raising kids. You're showing up at 4 in the morning to serve coffee to strangers. That's not less valuable than what I do. It's more valuable. You're keeping your family alive. I'm just entertaining people." Linda started crying again. "I don't know how much longer I can do this. I'm so tired." Dean reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out his wallet. Linda immediately panicked. "No. Please, I don't want your money. I wasn't—" Dean held up his hand. "I know you weren't asking, but I'm offering. Not because you need saving, but because I remember what it's like when one unexpected bill destroys everything. When your car breaks down and you don't have $50 to fix it, and you lose your job because you can't get to work. I remember that. And I promised myself if I ever had money, I'd help people in that situation. Not to be a hero, just because it's the right thing to do." He pulled out 5 $100 bills, put them on the counter. Linda stared at them. "That's $500. That's 4 months of rent." "Dean, I can't take this." "Yes, you can." Dean's voice was gentle but firm. "Here's what you're going to do. You're going to take this money. You're going to pay your rent. You're going to buy groceries. You're going to get your car fixed if it needs fixing. And you're going to take 1 day off. Just 1 day. Where you sleep, where you don't worry, where you just exist. Can you do that for me?" Linda was sobbing now. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Dean smiled. "Because 30 years ago someone did something similar for me. When I was nobody. When I was broke and scared. And they told me the same thing I'm telling you. It gets better. It doesn't feel like it will, but it does. And when it does, you help the next person. That's all." Linda took the money with shaking hands. She couldn't speak, couldn't process what was happening. Dean finished his eggs, left a $20 bill for the meal, way more than the cost, and stood up. "One more thing, Linda. Don't quit. Don't give up. I know it's hard. I know you're exhausted, but your kids need you to keep going, and you're stronger than you think. I can tell." Dean Martin walked out of that Denny's at 6:47 a.m., got in his car, drove to Las Vegas, never mentioned it to anyone, never told the press, never used it for publicity, just did it because Linda needed help, and he could help, and that was enough. Linda Morrison stood at the counter, holding $500, crying so hard she couldn't breathe. Her manager came back over. "What did he give you?" Linda looked at him. "Hope." She worked the rest of her shift in a daze. When she got home, she showed the money to her husband, David, told him what happened. David didn't believe her at first. Dean Martin gave you $500, just like that?" Linda nodded, "and he told me not to give up, that it gets better." They both cried. That night, they sat down and made a plan. Paid rent, bought groceries, got David's work boots repaired so he could take a construction job he'd been offered, and Linda took one day off. Just one. She slept for 12 hours, then woke up and cried. Not from sadness, from relief, from the overwhelming realization that someone had seen her, really seen her, and cared. But here's where the story gets interesting. 3 weeks later, Linda's manager called her into his office. She panicked. She hadn't done anything wrong. She'd been on time, hadn't spilled anything, hadn't messed up orders. "What's wrong?" "Linda," the manager said, "I got a call yesterday from Dean Martin's manager. He wanted to confirm you still worked here. He wanted to know if you were okay." Linda's heart stopped. "Why?" The manager shrugged. "I don't know, but I told him you were fine, that you'd been doing great. He said to tell you, Dean says, keep going. That's it. Just, Dean says, keep going." Linda sat down. Dean Martin had checked on her 3 weeks later to make sure she was okay. He hadn't forgotten, hadn't moved on. He'd actually cared enough to follow up. From that moment on, something changed in Linda. The exhaustion didn't disappear. The struggles didn't stop. But she had proof that people could be kind, that someone had seen her struggle and helped without expecting anything in return, and it gave her strength. Over the next 2 years, David found steady work. They saved money, moved to a better apartment. Linda eventually left Denny's and got a job as a school secretary. Better hours, better pay, health insurance. Things got better, just like Dean said they would. Linda never forgot. In 1985, when she was 40 years old and finally financially stable, she started volunteering at a homeless shelter. She'd serve meals. She'd listen to people's stories. And whenever someone looked hopeless, looked like they were about to give up, she'd tell them, "It gets better. I know it doesn't feel like it, but it does. And when it does, you help the next person." People would ask where she learned that, and Linda would smile and say, "A friend taught me." In 1995, when Dean Martin died, Linda read about it in the newspaper. She sat at her kitchen table and cried for an hour. Her husband asked, "Did you know him well?" Linda shook her head. "I met him once, for 5 minutes, but he changed my life." She wrote a letter to Dean Martin, told her the story of the Denny's, the spilled coffee, the $500. The follow-up call. She ended the letter with, "Your father saved my life that day. Not because he gave me money, though that helped, but because he saw me. He treated me like I mattered, like I was a human being worthy of kindness. And in that moment, when I was invisible to everyone else, Dean Martin made me feel seen. Please tell him thank you. I never got the chance." Dina responded 2 weeks later. She said, "My father never mentioned this story, but that's exactly who he was. He helped people quietly, without fanfare, without expectation of recognition. Thank you for sharing this. It means more than you know." In 2017, a documentary filmmaker was making a film about Dean Martin's kindness. He'd heard rumors of the Denny's incident but couldn't verify it. He tracked down Linda Morrison, now 72 and retired in Nevada. He asked if she'd be willing to tell the story on camera. Linda agreed. She sat in front of the camera and told the entire story. When she finished, the filmmaker asked, "Why do you think Dean Martin helped you that day?" Linda thought for a long moment. Then she said, "Because he remembered what it felt like to be invisible. to be poor, to be one crisis away from collapse, and he'd made a choice when he became successful. He could forget where he came from, pretend he'd always been Dean Martin. Or he could remember he was once Dino Crocetti, a broke kid from Ohio who needed help, and he chose to remember. That's what made him different. The filmmaker asked, "Did you ever see Dean Martin again?" Linda shook her head. "No, but I didn't need to. What he gave me that day wasn't about a relationship. It was about a moment. A moment when someone powerful chose to help someone powerless. Not because it would benefit him, not because it would make him look good, but because it was the right thing to do. And that moment has carried me for 50 years. Every time I've struggled, every time I've wanted to give up, I remember Dean Martin looking at me and saying, 'It gets better.' And I keep going." The documentary aired in 2018. Linda's story was featured prominently. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of people wrote to Linda, sharing their own stories of small acts of kindness that changed their lives. A teacher who'd given a student lunch money. A boss who'd paid for an employee's car repair. A neighbor who'd babysat for free so a single mother could work. These weren't grand gestures. They were small moments of seeing someone struggle and helping. No cameras, no recognition, just humanity. Linda started a blog called Pass It Forward. She'd share stories people sent her, stories of kindness, of people helping strangers, of the ripple effect that comes from one person choosing compassion over indifference. The blog's tagline was Dean Martin's words, "It gets better, and when it does, you help the next person." Over 5 years, the blog received over 2 million visitors. Thousands of people shared their stories, and Linda would respond to every single one with the same message. "You matter. Your struggle is real, but you're stronger than you think. Keep going." In 2022, at age 77, Linda was diagnosed with cancer. She wrote one final blog post, "I don't know how much time I have left, but I know this. Dean Martin gave me 55 extra years. Because on February 14th, 1967, when I was ready to give up, he gave me hope. And hope is the most powerful thing you can give someone. So if you're reading this and you're struggling, please hear me. It gets better. I promise it does. And when it does, help the next person. That's all we can do. See each other, help each other, keep going." Linda Morrison died in October 2023. At her funeral, her sons read the story of the Dennys, the spilled coffee, Dean Martin's kindness, and they ended with this: "Our mother spent her life helping others because one man helped her. That's legacy, not fame, not wealth, but the choice to see someone's pain and ease it, even for a moment. Thank you, Dean Martin, for seeing our mother, for helping her, for teaching her to pass it forward. And thank you, Mom, for spending 56 years doing exactly that." So the next time you see Dean Martin on stage, singing and smiling and looking effortlessly cool, remember Linda Morrison. Remember the Dennys. Remember the spilled coffee. Remember the man who stopped in the middle of his own journey to help a stranger. Not for recognition, not for credit, just because it was right. That's who Dean Martin was. Not just the entertainer, but the man who remembered being invisible, who remembered struggling, who remembered needing help, and who chose again and again to help others the way he wished he'd been helped. Dean Martin gave Linda Morrison $500 that day, but what he really gave her was dignity, the belief that she mattered, that her struggle was valid, that someone saw her, And that gift, that moment of being seen, carried her through 56 years, changed her life, changed her children's lives, changed the lives of everyone she helped through her volunteer work and her blog. One moment, one act of kindness, 5 minutes in a Denny's on Valentine's Day, 1967, and it rippled forward for over half a century. That's power. That's legacy. That's what it means to be truly cool. Not performing coolness, but living with compassion. Dean Martin understood that, and Linda Morrison made sure the world would never forget it. Rest in peace, Linda. You passed it forward, just like Dean asked you to.